begin. So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Gethin, Nadin. I'm Director of Employee Wellbeing at Benefex. This is the latest in a series of unscripted live broadcasts with experts in wellbeing from around the world. And I'm delighted today to welcome Karen Weeks. So hi, Karen, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Good. Thank you so much for having me.
And so just kind of before we get started, could you just give us a little bit of an overview on Ordergroove and kind of who you are and what you do? Thank you.
Absolutely. So Ordergroove is a SaaS technology, and we work with retailers and brands to help them create relationship commerce, which is recurring revenue programs. Usually that's subscriptions. So if you go to PetSmart and buy a bag of dog food and you get that dog food every 30 days, that's Ordergroove's technology working with PetSmart. But we can do it in a variety of different ways, in store when stores are open, online, monthly boxes, membership programs, a variety of different ways. And we work with all the retailers and brands out there to help them, most importantly, obviously help them with their revenue, but more importantly, help them with their relationships with their customers. So how to keep the customers loyal to them, make sure they feel like it's a personalized story for them. And here are just some of the clients that we work with. It's a pretty special list, especially considering we're a 80-person startup company.
Excellent, good stuff. So one thing we were going to talk about today is kind of lifestyle well-being, and then maintaining a physical lifestyle and maintaining what we kind of sometimes benefits called leisure well-being or lifestyle well-being. And they're two areas that have become really important to our pillars of well-being. So we believe that kind of the time people spend on creative and interesting and entertaining pursuits in their lives are really important. So although you have the traditional kind of mental, emotional well-being and the traditional physical well-being and financial well-being and all that good stuff, we've also got this idea that, you know, the things we do, the entertainment we have, the hobbies, our cultural pursuits, our spiritual or religious pursuits, all these things form part of a lifestyle that we think is really important to maintain. So, you know, taking time off work, going on holidays, going to the cinema, meeting up with friends, going to restaurants. These were all things that we felt were really important things to capture as part of workplace well-being. And so that formed one of our pillars. And I think what's really interesting is each one of these sessions we've been running kind of nods to one of those different areas of well-being. And we're starting to see some of those areas of well-being becoming so much more important to people's lives. And I think what I'm fascinated about is to see the things that we now miss because we've been in lockdown, and most people listening to this will be in a country that's probably locked down in some form or another. We started to found this new appreciation for actually, you know, eating out and the pleasure that gives us, you know, doing things like going to the cinema, going to bars, being able to play golf or do outside exercises. And, you know, when you start to think about all the research people are doing in mental health at the moment, because people like the Lancet, the scientific journal, have produced a really big piece of research over the last couple of weeks where they compared what we're going through now during lockdown to what countries went through during the SARS lockdown, kind of 2008, 2009-ish. And what they found is people exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress following lockdown. And so they're really studying this now because they believe that not having that face time with family and friends, not having that leisure and entertainment time is going to have a significant effect on our mental health for years to come. So actually it's being described as this kind of next wave of mental health is what happens afterwards. If lockdown starts to ease, as we're seeing in the UK, as that kind of starts to ease, what new problems are going to come? And there's all sorts of things that might follow. Our well-being is going to kind of take a bit of a kick in, I think, from all angles. You know, developed countries are probably going to go into some form of recession if we're not already. And so I think I'm really looking forward to talking about that mixing pot of all those different things with you and kind of how you've coped. And I guess the first thing I'd like to kind of talk to you about, because we are a UK company, we have lots of people listening who are from the UK, and we hear when Trump does something wrong, we hear about it. And I'm saying to you, when Boris Johnson does something wrong, you probably hear about that too. So I just think that somebody who's on the ground as a vice president of people, how do you think the kind of US is handling at the moment, and kind of what changes have you seen that we might not have seen in this country?
It's really interesting because I think, unfortunately, everything is so politicized right now. And I think everyone tries to start on the right foot and do the right thing. And then to your point, this is extremely difficult, whether that is emotionally, physically for the people that are getting sick or know people who are getting sick. The economy is crashing and so many people have lost their jobs here. And so it's a very hard thing to go through. And as you continue to have to go through it, we're on month 2, if not more. We know it's going to keep going for a while. People are now starting to really take sides. And I think it's really tough to see that in the country. I think it's small groups. I think like everything, right? There's people on one side that feel strongly, and there's people on the other side who feel strongly, and probably most people are in the middle. But I think you're starting to hear more and more about, I never will feel comfortable going back. It's going to be 2021. I'm so scared, to this is ridiculous. We should just be going back. Too bad, to everybody in the middle going like, let's find some sort of compromise. And I think the thing that's been really interesting to see from a HR standpoint or VP of People standpoint is this is a moment where companies are going to be remembered either good or bad. And especially with social media and blog posts and everything, are you going to be the company that sent out a Slack message and let go a lot of people that way? Or are you going to be like Airbnb and do things and offer like 6 months severance or some of these ridiculous benefits to really help your team through this? And so I think when we get past this, those are going to be some of the things that people remember is, as a company, did you do the best you could and handle it quote unquote the right way? Or are you going to be remembered, unfortunately, as a company that maybe made some missteps?
It's really interesting. I think the court of public opinion is very much in session, and I think certainly in this country, and we've heard from lots of the US employers as well about some of them are really leading the charge. So I guess we've seen in the last week or so, Google and Facebook have said home working until the end of the year. So again, as we saw in this country, employers basically saying, I don't really care what the government advice is going to be. If I can do it and I think it's the right thing to do, I'm going to do that. And I know that in the US as well, companies started locking down before the government told them to, because they're kind of like, actually, this is the right thing to do. And it's obvious to me, I think, that those people are going to be remembered for doing the right thing, because I think it's they're cultures that are driven by actually looking after and caring for their employees.
Well, I think,
sorry.
I was just saying real quickly, I think that if you are a company where that decision is easier, you want to go ahead and take care of it, because that way we aren't additional people on the subway. Ordergroove is very fortunate. We can work from home. Of course, that's more difficult for some people than others, and especially when the schools are closed. But in general, we all have our laptops, so we can sit here in our bedrooms or whatever and do our work. So remove us from the situation and let the subways and the healthcare workers and all the folks that don't have that option, let's lessen their risk, and we can stay at home because they may not be able to.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And the pandemic hit the US much later than Europe, and certainly most parts of Europe. So are you starting to get into that phase of, are you thinking about like lifting the lockdown? Is there this sense of kind of within HR in the US around what are we doing next? Are we planning for that? Because we're definitely in that phase of thinking about return to work, and lockdown has started to be lifted this week in some semblance. Are you at that point yet?
Yeah, it's very interesting. You can tell by the webinar invites that I get as an HR person, the trend of the virus. So first it was, how do you decide to go home? How do you help people work from home successfully? How do you decide to join the office again? And so in some places, yes, here in New York City, we're not close. But in other areas of the country, people are starting to go back, or they're starting very slow phasing to go back. But to your point, on the flip side, then literally the same breath, you hear the University of California state schools announced that they would be doing fall semesters virtually already. They just announced that, I guess, overnight. Twitter and Google and all those guys are announcing it. But on the flip side, I was literally on a leadership roundtable yesterday where several manufacturing and those kinds of companies are planning their go back to work. How are they going to handle it? Raising their cubicle walls. So I think it really depends on what part of the country and what your industry is on what your return to work is.
Because it's fascinating in the UK's perspective. We all react to one man or one government say so, but in the US you've got kind of state and federal kind of competing. So you might lock down one area like New York as a state, and then the next state along they might lift restrictions really quickly, and you've got people clearly commuting between those two states sometimes.
Yeah, it's really messy. I mean, even within New York, upstate New York can do things that New York City can't, or you've seen that even in Georgia. Lots of areas of Georgia have been opening up, and the mayor of Atlanta has been very concerned about that. So it is very blurry, very gray. It's, you know, it's a little bit of a mess, especially because no one has gone through this before, and we don't necessarily have leadership that can help us through it. So we're kind of taking it day by day and figuring it out as we go.
Because it's interesting, in the UK, we've had a small hint of what you must go through kind of with any kind of state and federal legislation, because the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament have rejected Boris Johnson's rules for England, and they've remained locked down. So the rules that we've got, where some people can now meet one person, I think, outdoors from a different household. Some team sports and golf have started to resume. Garden centres have opened. In Wales, most of that, they've decided no. And so you've got people living on the borders. You've got, you know, I live in Wales, but my employer is in England. So it's kind of like I'm stuck in this, you know, if those rules of the workplace were defined in the same way, then kind of what would I be doing? You know, I'd have to kind of, it's just really, really messy. But interesting how people are using it. So one of the things when we kind of talked about what we were going to discuss on this webinar, and we talked about those different elements of well-being and how people were kind of struggling at the moment and how they would continue to struggle and how that struggle would evolve. You talked a lot about the whole self when we spoke before, and I really love this. So can you just take us a little bit, for people who haven't come across this, about what that means to you and why you think it's important at the moment?
Yeah, I think especially right now, we are so self-contained that we need to make sure that we are taking care of every part of ourself, whether that is our physical well-being, obviously with the virus, that is really important. Recognizing, to your point about the PTSD and the emotional side of what's happening in that mental health state, as well as what is really important to us in our soul, our spirit, whatever you want to call it, and really thinking about us as a whole package. I may be exercising a lot, but maybe I'm not realizing that my brain is so busy and I never turn it off, and that's actually more exhausting than, you know, the work I may be doing. And so I think if you really recognize that as a whole human being, home, work, friends, hobbies, family, physical, mental, all of that creates you. And I think we kind of know that in theory, but especially during really stressful times, if you don't take care of every part of you or listen to the part of you that's screaming at the moment, you are not actually going to be well during this time.
Because I think it's fascinating, isn't it? I think the concentration that we have in our lives at the moment, you know, we are physically and mentally fixing ourselves to one location pretty much. And I think that's certainly, if I reflect on my own experiences the last 2 months, I've become really conscious of things like sleep pattern and diet, because I guess it's more difficult to keep a track of when I'm sometimes getting up at 6 in the morning and getting on a train for 2 hours, and sometimes my day starts at 10 because that's just the nature of the job I do. And when you're going out and eating food on the go, you're not necessarily keeping a track of the things that you're eating. But day to day, I am now more conscious of what I'm eating. I'm more conscious of how I'm sleeping. And I just think that's kind of really fascinating how over the last 2 months, I've been really easily been able to track, especially the day I've had and what happened that day with how well I sleep. So for the first time ever, I'm able to identify some triggers in what my well-being. And I think that's quite interesting.
Well, and I think especially because you don't have any sort of escape right now, whether that is for whatever reason, home life is really stressful, work becomes your escape, or work is really stressful and home is your escape, or I need to go to a concert because that's the way I like release my energy, or whatever the thing is for you. You don't even have your commute right now. For me, the shower and my commute were the two places where it was like, no one bothers me. I get to do whatever I want. And that's a beautiful time for me. And I didn't have that long of a commute. It was maybe 30 minutes at the most, but the routine of doing that, having that time to read or whatever, because I was on a subway, so I never had any Wi-Fi. I didn't realize how special that was to me until I didn't have it. And so I think, you know, I I work with a therapist, and I was talking to her one day and I said, I just feel like I'm in such a fog. And she said, you need to be better about asking yourself, what do you need at this moment? And your body, your mind, whatever you believe tells you, will tell you what it needs. It may be quiet. It may need a spiritual connection. It may be you need time for yourself. It may be that you need to burn some energy. We used to love going to concerts and movies and Broadway shows. None of that's happening anytime soon. And so you have to find a new vessel for that, whether it's watching bands on Facebook Live or sitting and listening to a full album beginning to end. When was the last time anybody did that? Probably. So asking yourself, what do I need? What's the stress in my life right now? And what do I need to relieve that? And really listen to yourself. And it will be any one of those different things that are part of the whole self.
I've worked from home for about 10 years now, I think, across different employers. And somebody asked me recently, how do I decompress at the end of the day? And I was kind of like, oh, what do you mean? And they, exactly the same as you, they were like, well, I've got a commute. So the commute is when I will read my book or listen to a podcast or listen to music or just stare out of the window at nothing. So that when I get home, I've left work behind. I've physically and mentally left work behind. And I get home, and that means any tension or anger or kind of frustration that came out of the day or dealing with people wasn't then brought home. And it stuck with me for weeks and weeks about, I need to do that. I don't do that because I leave one room and I come into another room and that's my evening. And this is long before coronavirus was a thing. That was my life. So the homeworking element of work, coronavirus, is kind of, I've adapted that pretty well because that was my life. And now I've become, again, really conscious of that decompression and how am I mentally telling myself the day has ended. That's become quite a big thing as well. So I've got into the habit of kind of 5:30 going for a walk, and that's my kind of way of physically getting all that kind of whatever I need to get out, which I think is quite interesting. But so how do you do that yourself now you don't have that commute? What have you replaced with something?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done a couple of different things. Part of it kind of depends on the schedule. Some days, if it's really nice, I'll take the dog out for an extra walk. She's like, this is great. Other days, I may listen to some music. I may write. I may exercise. So it kind of depends on how my day is gone and what kind of decompression I need before I sort of turn it over to my home life. The other thing I do is I make sure I always close my computer. Now my job is definitely not 9 to 5. I very well may open it again later that night, but it's sort of my way of putting it in my briefcase and going on my commute. And then during dinner and all of that, phone, computer, nothing is around. And then, like I said, if I need to get back online later, of course I will. But that couple of hours is my time with my husband, with the furry babies, and that's not work time.
And how's your kind of work setup? Do you have an office space, or have you just kind of created a little office for you to kind of cope while you're locked down?
We are very fortunate. 2 years ago, we moved into an apartment that we did have a spare room. And so we've been able to turn it into, and I have an actual desk, and I'm able to face a wall so that if my husband does walk in, you don't see him. So I'm very, very lucky. 2 years ago when we lived in Queens, we loved Queens, but the space would have been very difficult to work out of with both of us.
Because I think that's what's quite interesting for me in my situation at the moment is my partner's home working all the time as well. Because I work from home quite a lot, we have an office and I use the office, and that's all been fine. And then we had to kind of get almost like an emergency desk, and that's now in the bedroom. And I can leave that room behind and physically leave that room, but then my partner's got to go back in the same room to sleep.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how they've developed this routine about folding everything away, putting the computer away out of sight, so it becomes a bedroom and then becomes an office again.
Yeah.
And I think it's, one of the other slides I pulled out was something you mentioned when we spoke before, and I think it's pertinent to what we're talking about at the moment, is we have people in those situations, right? So we are both very lucky that we have space to have an office. I completely understand that. We don't have gardens though, which again has been a really big frustration and something I have massively missed. Never really missed it up until now. And that's been a big challenge, not having an outside space, especially when the weather's been good. And this is the kind of quote on screen is something you shared with me last week, that, you know, we're all in this storm, but we're not in the same boat. And so the needs and wants of employees at the moment are just incredibly diverse, right? They just, and how do we support people who have lots of space, outdoor space, a swimming pool, versus employees that are living alone in a one-bedroom apartment?
It was fun. We actually did a couple of contests for exactly that thing, because we heard people sort of apologizing for their lack of office setup. And, you know, you see people on CNN and they have the bookcases behind them and it's beautiful and all this setup. And, you know, we have people working from their couch, from their kitchen table, from a hallway console, which is clearly not a desk, but it's the only plain surface that they have, using a toaster as a standing desk. And so we actually did a fun contest of what is sort of the most unique way you have set up a home office during this. And then we had people vote on everything, because we wanted to sort of celebrate the weirdness of what is happening right now. So that was one thing that we did, but more importantly, we have really focused on the individual. So luckily, again, I feel very fortunate that we had some of these things actually as already part of our foundation, but individuality and flexibility is something that's always been important to our culture. And so when I think of other perks we've had in the past, it's been allowances for things, because what wellness means to you is different than what wellness means for someone else. And so it might be a gym, it might be a Headspace subscription. So we've continued that to say, you know, look, you have an allowance. If that is for getting alcohol delivered to you, if that is for upping your Wi-Fi because 5 roommates are trying to use the same Wi-Fi, or if that is to buy a better chair or something, because, or, you know, a table that can kind of go over you and recreate a desk, you can use it for any of those things. Just talk to us and we'll help you figure it out. And so we've set the limit in the sense of we can't afford to pay for childcare or anything, but we want, what do you need and how can we help support you? And even things like blocking your calendar. So we have a lot of parents that are trying to figure out homeschooling and work. So just block your calendar. If you're in charge of school in the afternoon, block it and people know not to bother you, or turn Slack off, or whatever the different things are. And we'll try to figure this out.
And has that been an easy thing for you to do internally? Is it easy to get buy-in for that? Because it's to a certain extent a blank check, right? And that's going to come up with a lot of friction for people, especially now. So kind of how did you get your kind of senior leadership buy-in for that?
So I think the good news is that our senior leadership team was going through the exact same stuff. And so this is one of those moments where, to your point, we're not on the same boat, but the storm is bringing us all to the same perspective, in the sense of none of us have expected this. It's not like we had months to plan for this. That yes, some people are more fortunate than others, but we're all trying to figure out the same thing, and we're all stuck at home in the same situation. So the ability to support people for us was a very natural response. And we went home a little earlier than other people. We're going to stay out later than probably others. But I recognize that is not the case for everybody. I have a lot of people who work, you know, either in restaurants or the arts or manufacturing, where they just don't have that same flexibility. But we tried to say, within reason, because we're also a startup, we don't have, you know, Twitter said something like everybody gets $1,000 a month to be able to work from home. And we clearly do not have those funds. But for what we can do, we trust that you're going to use it the right way. And if not, that's a different conversation. We had similar conversations about performance management. Like, if you have someone who's struggling performance-wise, that is a performance conversation. It's not because you don't trust them, and they'd have those performance issues, or they'd have those communication issues no matter where they were working.
And do you think, because you already had this attitude of kind of care and you understood well-being of your staff was important, do you think you will, or have so far, weathered this storm better because you already had that in your organization?
I hope so. You know, we do monthly pulse surveys and people are saying they feel supported. I think the biggest thing we're struggling with is the connectivity between teams that don't work together. So that person you randomly bump into in the kitchen, or you know, whatever, bump into in the elevator. I think those are the pieces that we're still really struggling with, because we were very much an in-office company. I mean, you could work from home if the plumber was showing up, but in general, people were in the office most of the time. And so I think those organic interactions is something that we're really struggling with to recreate while everyone is remote right now.
I guess on that point, if anyone has any ideas in their organization that have worked about kind of giving those small moments of connection back to the organization, let us know in the Q&A. So on Zoom, you can ask us a question. If it's not a question, you just want to share an idea or comment, please let us know, and we'll kind of pick up those as we go along. And I guess onto the kind of crux of this kind of lifestyle well-being. Clearly, if we start to see those restrictions being lifted in both our respective countries, it's going to be a while before things get back to normal. And obviously, we know that organizations like yours, Benefex and Twitter and Google and all those others, are likely to still continue to work from home for some time after those restrictions start to get lifted. And the knock-on effects mean that, you know, coronavirus in some form is going to be around for quite a long time, I think, still. And so what we're starting to see, particularly in the US, and for anyone who joined some of our previous webinars, we kind of talked about this quite a lot, about kind of shifting consumer attitudes, because that people are now starting to accept that we've had this full lockdown, restrictions will start to get lifted, but in this country, the expectation is being set that there will be some form of lockdown until October, maybe August, but likely kind of in some form or another until kind of September to October. And so as people are kind of maintaining or getting used to that lockdown situation and getting geared up for life at home for the summer, how do you think we can get them to keep doing the things they love and find, you know, stuff we talked about that we both like doing and we miss? How do we bring that stuff back? How do we help our employees enjoy their lives and get out of this monotonous routine that they're in?
It's interesting, just at this leadership roundtable I was at yesterday, someone said they're going to keep their summer Fridays. So as a company, they used to always shut down at 2:00 on Fridays to encourage people to enjoy sort of the summer afternoons. And they're going to keep doing that, even if they really don't have anywhere to go or it's very limited. The mental break that gives their employees was really important. And so they're continuing to do that even in lockdown. We actually just extended Memorial Day weekend, which for us is usually towards the end of May. I think it's usually like the fourth Monday of May. We are actually turning that into a 4-day weekend. So we're going to take the Friday off before and that Monday. Again, we realize people probably can't go to the beach per se, like maybe they normally would, but you don't have to be online. You don't have to be in front of a Zoom camera. Whatever you want to do for yourself, whether it's go for a longer walk or whatever you want to do, we want people to take that mental break away from work. So I think finding opportunities to encourage people to still take PTO, paid time off, vacation, whatever that, even if it's staycation, right? Like I understand people can't go anywhere right now, but it doesn't mean that you can't just not have to worry about getting up at a certain time or enjoying time with your animals or family or whoever's with you in lockdown right now, whether it's going for a hike, but really still finding. You can sit in your pajamas and watch Netflix and eat ice cream. Like it doesn't matter what you do, just do something. And you now more than ever still need that time off.
I think it's really interesting. In the second week of lockdown, 2 different HR directors asked me, is it okay for us to still be encouraging people to take their annual leave? And we ended up writing some comms for them kind of to send out to the customers. But yeah, absolutely. I think as somebody who was supposed to be in Japan for most of April, who had to cancel all of that, obviously, I had that decision to make about do I still take the holiday? And because I had it all geared up for the end of the year, because our holiday year ends quite soon, I had to use that holiday. And I was trying to think of ways I could use it, and it meant that I could, we could only go out for walks or exercise once a day up until recently in this country. But exactly as you said, I was using a lot of it to play on Animal Crossing, the new game I bought, catch up on some TV. Obviously, my cleaner's not coming around, so I cleaned the flat and realised what a difficult job she's got. So I kind of did all those things. But it really dawned on me how important it was with everything else I was dealing with. I'm worried about my parents who are self-isolating. I'm kind of worried about the economy and work, and I'm worried about my partner and my friends. And I could take one of those things away. I had some semblance of control, which meant I can't stop worrying about all those things because it's just endemic that it's going on. But I could physically take one of those things away and think, okay, if I just have one less thing to think about for 24 hours, then does that help? And it made a massive difference to how I've coped with this, because I've taken actually quite a lot of time off because I had quite a lot to use. This week I've had Monday and Tuesday off. I'm in today and I'm off Thursday and Friday. And so it's helping me actually cope with this pandemic really, really well. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, is to encourage people to do that. And you also mentioned the last time we talked about things we can control. So I guess that what I've just said is a really good example, right? It's about encouraging employees to take control over whatever things they can in their lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I reference the Serenity Prayer less for religion, but actually my grandmother was in AA for 32 years, and it was something that she really lived by. And it talks about knowing the things you can control, what you can't, and understanding the difference. And I think that whether it's control or change, knowing right now everything feels out of control. I can't leave my apartment. I can't go to the grocery store, or I can, but I can't go to restaurants. I can't do this. I can't do that. But there are things I still can do. I can bake. I can call my family. I can knit if that's something you're interested in. I can read a book. So recognize the things that you can do and focus on those, because in a life where everything feels out of control or feels like you can't change anything that's happening, that's actually not true, but that's hard to recognize. Once you do recognize it, even create a list, if that's your kind of personality, then you take an ownership of that, and it will help you feel less like you're in a tornado and just spinning out of control.
And do you think, because I guess one of the things we'll probably hear at the moment is like, is it the employer's place to be helping somebody with that stuff?
I think it is when you realize someone's really struggling. It's hard because everybody's so different, right? Like some people don't want to talk about it, and that's completely fine, and I respect that. Other people are much more open about it. And so I think a couple of things that I've done as the head of people is just to say, I'm here. If you want to talk, if you need help, I'm not your therapist, but I can definitely help you think through how to balance all of this, or share. I'm very open about, after the first couple of weeks when I was so focused on taking care of everybody else, I crashed and I needed a couple of days for myself. And so I'm very open sharing sort of what I've found to be helpful or not helpful. So I think just being a person that someone can turn to if they want to know that we're there for them if that's something that they need.
Which is interesting, actually, because people like me for years have been saying that human resources has evolved into this thing that's more about, I used to call it kind of, it's almost like a maitre d' for the organization. They'd go around and make sure all the employees had everything they needed, that they were fully supported, they had all the equipment, they had all the support, they were in the right place mentally. Just almost like you could almost imagine HR going around everyone's desk and be like, what can I do for you? My job is to make you as comfortable as possible so you can do your job effectively. And I guess what we've seen now is that's happened, right? That's one of the things that's been thrust upon us that we've proved works. We've started to see that actually HR isn't just this process orientated hiring and firing. It actually has a reality in which employees need help, and they get help, and they turn into HR to get that. And I guess we see the same with reward and benefits as well. We've seen people use benefits to enhance their life and take control. You kind of mentioned when we spoke before about consumers are doing some of that stuff as well, where we're kind of redirecting how we do things. So we can't go to restaurants, but we're finding that the restaurants that have now become takeaways and getting that food delivered. I've had deliveries from kind of butchers and bakers that I'd never actually even gone to before, but because they started offering, you kind of change that lifestyle. And if anyone joined any webinars previously, we got lots of comments from people who were taking up benefits that they'd never considered before, and flexing that lifestyle, like making those changes to adjust to this new normal.
It's so interesting whether, I know sometimes the word culture gets overused right now, and if one more candidate tells me they're looking for a strong culture, like I'll vomit. But I think the culture, values, employee promise, employee experience, whatever you call it, if you've built that to be a really strong foundation for your organization, that's what you're going to rely on right now to help your employees through this. Whether that is authenticity and a true statement of, if your kid runs through, or like our doorbell just rang and you may or may not have heard the dog, whatever, that's life right now. That's my authentic life right now. Or whether that is an openness of support, whether that is flexible perks and benefits, whatever is actually important to your organization. Hopefully you've built that, and that's what you can actually lean on to help people through this times of change.
Excellent. We've had a question in from Suzanne. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Suzanne asks, are you seeing companies who may not have been focused in the past on employee well-being becoming more proactive in that scope now? And if so, do you see them integrating it into their workplace when the pandemic subsides, i.e. reinventing the workplace? It's a question I've been asked a lot at the moment. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have definitely seen that happen, whether that is more and more companies leaning into remote work and being comfortable with people working from home, whether that is recognizing the importance of mental health and building that into their benefits programs as best as they can, whether that is, PTO or supporting parents. I've definitely seen people say, hey, if we can do it during this really hard time where we weren't expecting it, so we didn't sort of put any research or planning into it, and it's been going well, that actually says something about what our team needs and how can we continue that moving forward. I think I don't want to say everybody, I think a lot of people might still be in it's working well for us now, we'll continue to wait and see, because I think some people, we just can't picture what that new normal is going to look like yet, but they're definitely building into, at least for the short term, while we're in this situation, this is going really well, so we're going to double down on it, and we'll consider it more for the future as well.
Because it's a fascinating experiment. I know it's been thrust upon us, but I was talking to HRD yesterday who phoned me about something I shared on LinkedIn, who wanted to talk about how do they get their business to not go back to normal. She was really keen that the stuff that this HRD's wanted to be doing for quite a long time in working for a chemical company, lots of engineers who very much kind of command and control leadership, the out of sight, out of mind attitude. And she was really keen on, we've done this, and for lots of people, it has, acknowledging that some people can't work from home, don't want to work from home, but for the vast majority, giving that flexibility and choice, they want to keep that, because actually the economic reasons on the individual, so people realizing that actually just working from home 2 days a week might save me a couple of £100 or dollars every month. Why aren't we allowing people to do that? Because all of a sudden we improve mental health and improve financial well-being, because we're effectively getting a pay rise because of the way that you're changing the working hours or working location. And one of the things that they basically said was, I kind of explained that this is an experiment under different circumstances. So we have to do this, and that will be used against HR. I think we don't have, when this is over, we don't have to, we're not forced to do that. So, but they were really concerned that it's going to go back to normal. And I sent this lady an article I read this morning where in the UK, 91% of employees said when they went back to work, they wanted some of that flexibility or all of that flexibility to remain. And that's huge. How often do you see employee surveys with results in the 90s? And so it feels like this is progression. It's forced upon us, and it's not a great situation, but it feels like it feels to me like we've passed this point of no return. I can't. And the reason why I asked you about whether you you're weathering this storm a little bit better than others, because you already cared about the well-being of your staff, was because from all the experiences I've had with our customers who've spoken to me, I reckon I could draw a line through. If you already did some good things for your staff and you already cared about mental health and financial well-being and all this kind of stuff, you already have the tools in place to deal with something like this pandemic. And so certainly from my experience, those people who are well prepared for employee well-being are suffering through this a little bit better. Clearly, it affects in lots of different ways, but from an employee well-being perspective, I think that's been a fascinating exercise to see.
And I think that's where as HR people, use the data that you do have to help influence change moving forward. So do pulse surveys, do engagement surveys, ask your team what's gone well and what's not gone well. These are the times to pull that together to say, hey, leader, I know you don't like this, but your team is directly telling you this. So why wouldn't we at least continue to try it, or call it a pilot or a trial program if you're anxious about committing to something that you then potentially want to take away? But that data will hopefully support some of the decisions that you may want to do.
Excellent. So for our listeners, we're coming towards the end now. So if you have any questions, please get those in the next couple of minutes. You mentioned when we spoke before quite a lot of the ways you're using kind of virtual and digital to keep engagement high. Could you just take the viewers through a few examples of what you've done to kind of get people through this?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we've done, and actually I can also share some of the adjustments that we're making based on our most recent pulse survey, is that we have done virtual lunchrooms. So we used to have a place in the kitchen where people could come together and, they may stay 5 minutes, they may have stayed for half an hour, but we tried to recreate that through Zoom. We were doing it every day. I think we're actually going to cut it down because I think people felt like every day was a bit too much. And so we're now just going to do it on Mondays to sort of be the how was your weekend kind of lunch conversation. We're also adding in virtual toast. So every other Friday, we're going to do just celebrating wins, 0 slides, not led by leadership, truly just, nominate a couple of folks to share a win that they recently had so that the company hears about those things that you might normally just kind of hear about just bumping into someone. We've done virtual workouts, movie nights. We're about to launch a book club since that was a recommendation from somebody. We've done Dungeons and Dragons. We've done board games. We've done trivia. We did a couple of meditations. So basically, every month we try a couple of different things, and then we see, did people attend? If people didn't, why? We had to change our exercise time a couple of times to try to find the best time for folks. We then asked people to spread the word. It wasn't scary. Everybody turned off their video. No one saw you exercise. It's just a chance to come together and do it together. So those are some of the things that we've done. We've also created a couple of different Slack channels. We have a good news Slack channel. So kind of John Krasinski from the US office has started this thing. It's kind of taken off. And so people wanted to recreate that at Ordergroove. We've created a water cooler Slack channel. So we've tried a lot of different things for people who want it. There's that opportunity to connect. And then for within teams, the different teams have been doing things that work better for them based on their sort of personality of their teams.
And so there's a lot here, and I guess a lot of what we talked about is you're putting all these things out there, and people have got that choice and flexibility to use what they need. Because I think that really plays to the fact that we're all up and down with this, right? One day we need much more support and involvement with others than the next day. You could wake up feeling fine and not speak to any colleagues and be fine with that. And then one day you feel really down and you just want to talk about rubbish TV or whatever you've binged on Netflix. So I love that idea of a water cooler Slack channel, just the kind of nonsense you might just talk to somebody about in a Slack channel. I think is a really, really nice one. And we kind of touched upon this a little bit, but kind of how are you gearing to return to work? So appreciate it's not the same for you as it is for other employers around the world, but you starting to think about how do you do that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've heard a lot of companies talk about phased people going back to work. So people who really should have been in the office, let them go back first. I've heard people with offices with cubicles extending the cubicles higher so that there's a little more protection for people. I've heard about different time slots for work. So, half the company goes in from 9 to 1 and the other half goes in from 2 to 6, or Monday, Tuesday, Friday, or whatever sort of mix up they have. They've done a lot around cleaning and making sure that the environment is safe and even upping their cleaning. So every day they're doing cleaning. So those are some of for people who are going back, those are some of the things that I've heard about. Honestly, probably because I'm in the tech startup community, a lot of us just aren't going back. My CEO jokes that if someone has to take your temperature, you have to wear a mask, you can't sit next to, you have to have 4 chairs apart from you in a conference room. That is way more distracting and not worth it. Yeah. So, but again, we don't have to go back. For the companies that do need to go back, those are some of the things that I've heard that they're starting to go into place. A recent poll that I saw had people starting to plan to phase either June or July, most likely July, and then kind of do a phased approach after that. But like you said, there's a lot of concern about a fall outbreak and the emotional toll that will take. If I've started to feel I can go back to normal and then you take that away from me, that's going to be really hard for folks.
Yeah, and I think I think employers should really take the focus on, if you can open your office, but you're going to put all these social distancing measures in place, so your staff numbers will be limited. Think carefully about who you open the office up to, because there will be employees that really want to come back to the office. You know, we've seen things like domestic violence has increased significantly in this country and around the world. So people who don't have safe homes, you know, should we be giving those people first dibs on getting to the office? So I think there's a lot to think about. It's not just the physical kind of logistics. Just before we finish, we have a question here from Mark Greenwald. Hi, Mark. Do you have employees who've been placed on reduced hours or furlough type arrangements? And how are you ensuring those employees remain engaged with wellbeing programs and workshops? Is that affecting you at all?
It's a great question. We personally have not gone through that, but I do know a couple of companies that have, and they've kind of all taken different approaches depending on their organization. And so some folks, you know, are doing newsletters or virtual happy hours, almost like an alumni group for their furloughed people. Other companies have just kind of, you know, managers have reached out to the individuals as they can because they don't know the timing. And so they don't want to, they know every time they'll talk to them, they'll get the question of when will I come back? And so it's a hard situation to talk through. So it's kind of dependent on the situation. Ordergroove has not gone through that, but those are some of the things that I've heard about from other companies.
I think Mark as well. If you didn't attend, I think our countryside webinar a few weeks ago, and we've got another one in a few weeks' time. They've had to furlough 70% of their staff, and they've been really focused on actually we've got to focus on the well-being of those people, because furlough is so new to us in this country and for most people that it was really conscious that you needed to look after well-being a little bit differently for those people who are furloughed. And how do you actually keep them connected when you're not allowed to do any work and you shouldn't be contacting them regularly? So there's some quite interesting content on that one. And just quickly before we finish, one more question from Anonymous. Do you think this will enable more global expansion, given logistics are now out of the equation and your talent pool now broader?
It's a great question. I know we have thought about it within the US. We have not thought about it from a global standpoint, I think partially because we're only 75 people. So for us, not thinking about people in the New York City office, but just anywhere in the US is already a step in that direction. But I absolutely think that remote work, where you're doing your work from, literally, you know, if you're on the beach or in your apartment, or what country you're doing it from or what state you're doing it from, I think overall this is really going to change how people consider that. And I think there are also areas that have been impacted more than others by layoffs. And so there's amazing talent out there that is available, and people are going to want to talk to those candidates that are now on the market for sure.
Excellent. Well, as I mentioned, I work from home quite a lot, so I work 2.5 to 3 hours away from the office. So I'm part of that remote talent pool, I would say. So I think you want the best people in your location, or do you want the best people for the job? And I think, again, one of the things we've proved, right, is that actually, if your talent pool is now wider, why wouldn't you be using that to your advantage? Thank you very much, Karen. Really appreciate you joining us. Thanks very much for sharing your insights on what's happening across the pond. If you'd like to receive any previous webinars, we've got the details in the Q&A and the webinar chat, so you can kind of see, if you contact hello@benefex.co.uk, we can share the recordings of previous webinars and this one. You can find Karen and Ordergroove and myself and Benefex on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. So connect with us if you want to continue the conversation. For everyone who's been attending these sessions as well, we are offering a free wellbeing consultation with myself. That may or may not be a good way to spend your time, but if you'd like to, get in touch with me, and we'll pick out a couple of you randomly who attend these webinars, and that's just a nice little way to help you explore building a wellbeing strategy in a post-coronavirus world. So thank you very much, Karen. Really appreciate you joining us, and take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.